Hey everybody, Jim here, and welcome back to Mad Panic Gaming, where today fists will fly and countless skulls will be bashed in, because we're taking a look at some of the best beat-em-ups ever to grace an arcade cabinet. If you're a fan of games where you walk to the right and beat the bejesus out of anything that wanders on screen, then these are the games for you. So let's get started with what is undoubtedly one of the greatest beat-em-ups ever made, and that is 1994's Aliens vs. Predator. Developed and published by Capcom, this game was released at a time when they were on a roll with one great beat-em-up after another, including titles like The Punisher, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, and Dungeons and Dragons. But this game arguably sits atop all of them as the best belt-action brawler that Capcom ever produced. The game begins with Major Dutch Schaefer and Lieutenant Lin Kurosawa of the Colonial Marine Corps being cornered by a swarm of xenomorphs when they're suddenly bailed out by two predators, whom they then form an alliance with in order to put an end to this alien menace. But they will also have to go head-to-head with the treacherous Weyland-Yutani Corporation, who predictably are attempting to use the xenomorphs as weapons. The four playable characters all bring something unique to the table. Dutch is super strong, Lin is fast and has some killer combos, but for me, this being Aliens vs. Predator and all, I always go with one of the two playable Predators. They're strong as hell, can jump clear across the screen, come equipped with melee weapons, and have their trademark shoulder cannons which can blast xenomorphs into quivering bits. Dutch and Lin, on the other hand, have an arm cannon and a pistol respectively, which are both effective, but nothing beats a good fiery explosion. You can punch, slam, and blast the hell out of legions of enemies, but something else that makes this game so awesome is the amount of weapons at your disposal, especially a little later in the game when you're confronted by large groups of Colonial Marines. You'll get your hands on pulse rifles, smart guns, grenades, various melee weapons, and there's even a power-up that grants you unlimited projectile attacks for a brief period. So when that happens, just go crazy blasting any and everything that moves. When you've got a co-op game going and the screen fills up with enemies coming at you from all directions, AVP gets very chaotic very quickly, and it is a hell of a lot of fun. Again, some of the best gameplay to ever come from an arcade beat-em-up, and that covers a lot of ground. On top of that, this is a great looking game with some outstanding character and stage designs, lots of attention to detail, and a wide variety of enemy types to keep things from getting too repetitive. The soundtrack is honestly pretty lackluster, but you just can't argue with those sound effects taken directly from the Aliens and Predator movies. So overall, this game is about as solid and fun as a beat-em-up gets, and if you've never played it, you're really missing out. Aside from the arcade game itself, AVP has only had a home release once when it was included in that big Capcom home arcade plug-and-play thing. So if you don't have one of those, MAME is your best friend. Aliens vs. Predator is a bona fide classic. Next up, let's switch gears to something a bit more gory and goopy, and that is 1993's Night Slashers, developed by Data East. And this is a game that feels like it would have been tailor-made for me, as I was a huge fan of not only video games as a kid, but also horror movies, with zombie flicks like Return of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead being some of my favorites. So what could be better than a beat-em-up that has you taking on the legions of the undead? The plot centers around an all-out assault on humanity from the forces of darkness, including zombies, werewolves, vampires, and even the Grim Reaper himself. You've got 3 playable characters to choose from. There's Jack, the cybernetically enhanced monster hunter from the USA, Christopher, the English vampire hunter who feels like a cross between Van Helsing and Jean-Claude Van Damme, and Hong Hua, a Chinese demon slayer with some seriously kick-ass kung fu moves. Each character is useful in their own way, predictably featuring variations to their speed and attack strength. But something they all have in common is an assortment of attacks that can make quick work of the ghouls and monsters Night Slashers throws at you. Most beat-em-ups at the time gave their characters a basic combo and a super attack that sacrifices a bit of health, but here there's a bit more to it than that. Of course, you have your standard combo, but you can also perform a charge attack by holding down the attack button, which becomes more effective the longer you hold it. And you get the prerequisite radius attack performed by pressing the jump and attack buttons at the same time, but if you're playing co-op, you can also perform some team attacks such as the double pile driver, or launch your teammate into the air for a devastating dive attack. And finally, you can perform a screen-clearing super attack with the push of a button, but this does take away a significant portion of your health. Couple all of that with the various weapons the game tosses your way, and you've got a variety of methods for destroying the undead hordes, and you'll need to make use of all of them as Night Slashers does not go easy on you. The sheer volume of enemies you'll take on at once is a sight to behold, and the bosses you encounter will definitely put your skills to the test. In particular, the final couple of bosses are maddeningly cheap. So it's a good thing I'm playing on an emulator and not draining my bank account to make it through this one. Regardless, Night Slashers is a hell of a lot of fun and features some fantastic visuals and sound design, especially if you're playing the uncensored Japanese version. Aside from the arcade, Night Slashers is also available digitally on the Nintendo Switch, and there's even an HD remake on the way, which looks pretty damn cool. So if you like a little bit of blood and guts in your beat-em-ups, it doesn't get much better than Night Slashers. Now we move away from zombies and monsters and onto swords and sorcery with 1991's Warrior Blade Rastan Saga Episode 3, which was developed by Taito, and if you actually had the pleasure of playing this one in an arcade, it utilized Taito's big double screen setup that they also use for games like Ninja Warriors and Darius 2. Which I imagine must have been pretty cool, but alas, it's not quite as impressive when playing on emulator, but that can be forgiven because this game is 100% awesome. Warrior Blade has a lot in common with Sega's Golden Axe games, but if I'm being completely honest, I'd actually rather play Warrior Blade any day of the week. You get 3 playable characters to choose from, but with this being a Rastan game, I really only want to play as the man himself, as he's basically Conan the Barbarian. I myself being a big fan of Conan, both the movies and the long-running comic series. In terms of gameplay, Warrior Blade has a lot in common with most other beat-em-ups from the day, though it could probably better be described as a hack and slash, but I'm willing to make an exception. You have one attack button, a jump button, and of course you can perform jump attacks as well as dash attacks, but you can also find plenty of power-ups to aid you in your quest, such as a battle axe that temporarily increases your attack strength, or better yet, a fire amulet that allows you to shoot fireballs from your sword for a brief period. The best power-up though comes in the form of your wizard companion, Mahadi Dekaradi. His name is a mouthful, but when you've got this guy on your side, he can unleash powerful magic spells on your enemies, freezing them, shocking them, or turning them all into stone, which makes them easy pickings for you. After the game's introductory stage, you can choose the order in which you complete the rest of the stages, and at the conclusion of each one, you take on a boss battle, which can be anything from a giant kraken to an evil undead wizard. and after you defeat them, you gain a piece of treasure that also upgrades your abilities in some way, such as increased attack and defensive power or more powerful magic attacks. And aside from the standard hackin' and slashin', you'll also do battle on horseback or, coolest of all, taking to the skies on the back of a dragon for a bit of aerial combat. In general, Warrior Blade is a lot of fun. It's just a good old-fashioned hack and slash with a few cool little gimmicks thrown in for good measure, but it's made just that much better by the awesome setting and characters. You take on barbarians, monsters, wizards, the undead, and the entire game captures perfectly what I love about the swords and sorcery genre. It's kick-ass high adventure from start to finish, all with great graphics and an awesome soundtrack. Aside from the arcade, the only console release Warrior Blade ever saw was on the PS2 in Japan only, as part of the Taito Memories Collection Volume 2. So whatever way you can, definitely give Warrior Blade a try. It's what's best in life. Next up, since we've been looking at a lot of aliens, monsters, and barbarians, let's switch over to something a little more whimsical, and that's 1992's Hook by Irem. No, seriously, this game is awesome. When you hear the name Hook, your mind probably goes to the console games, which were pretty bad, but if you've never played the arcade game or possibly didn't even know there was one, I'm here to tell you that if you're a beat-em-up fan, you should play it, because as someone who's only played this game for the first time very recently, I was honestly shocked by how fun it is. For starters, this game does support up to 4 players at a time and features 5 playable characters. There's Peter Pan, of course, who is the all-around best character in the game, as you might expect, but you also have the option of playing as 4 of the Lost Boys. First and foremost is Rufio, alive and well, thank you very much, as well as Ace, Pockets, and Thudbutt. That's right, the fat kid that can roll himself into a ball was named Thudbutt, something I personally never knew before playing this game. So you've got a bunch of characters to choose from that each have different attacks and special abilities, and Hook plays a lot like any other beat-em-up. You've got a basic attack combo as well as a super attack that drains a bit of health, and you can attack downed opponents to your heart's content, which is admittedly very satisfying. Watching Pockets and Peter Pan stomp out some pirates is something I never knew I wanted to see, but I got a kick out of it. You also have plenty of weapons to make use of, such as spears, baseballs, and bombs, and something especially cool is that there are stage hazards that you can trigger to hurt your enemies, such as cutting a rope to drop an anchor on their head, or smacking a bunch of pots and pans into their face. You'd think a game that features a bunch of little kids fighting pirates wouldn't get very brutal, but hey, the Lost Boys didn't come to lose. You bash and smash the hell out of these guys, up to and including the dastardly Captain Hook and his right-hand man, Mr. Smee. Really, the only thing this game is missing is some good bonus stages. I would love a good flying stage, or possibly even something featuring the mermaids. That aside though, Hook is a very fun and well-made beat-em-up that I honestly forgot was supposed to be a movie license game while I was playing it. The visuals are pretty good for the time the game was made, the source material is put to good use, and the soundtrack is pretty good too, utilizing some recognizable tunes from the movie. If you've only ever played the crappy console games and wish there was at least one decent game based on Hook, your prayers were answered, because this game is awesome. Next up, since I can't rightly make a video about arcade beat-em-ups and not mention at least one Konami classic, let's take a look at 1991's The Simpsons, because this is another instance of a license that had some pretty bad console games made based on it, but the arcade game, on the other hand, was nothing short of excellent. A beat-em-up probably wasn't the first thing that people thought of at the time when they thought of The Simpsons, but if history has taught us anything, it's that you can take basically any TV show or movie and make a game where its main characters are beating the hell out of any and everything that wanders on screen. I was a massive fan of The Simpsons as a kid, and when this game was released, the second season of the show was just wrapping up. It's hard to explain now just how much of a phenomenon The Simpsons was to someone who wasn't around at the time. The President of the United States literally mentioned it in a public address, though he seemed like he didn't really care much for the show. Anyway, this game starts off with Mr. Smithers and some goons in the midst of a heist when a diamond ends up in Maggie's mouth. So instead of just removing the diamond, Smithers runs off with the entire baby. So it's up to the rest of the Simpson family to track him down and get Maggie back, ultimately culminating in a final battle with Mr. Burns in a mech suit. And even after all of that, he still couldn't remember Homer's name. The Simpsons is a very fun and frantic beat-em-up that controls more or less the same as the first TMNT game. So you have a standard attack and a more powerful attack that can be performed by pressing both the jump and attack buttons at the same time. And as a nice change from most beat-em-ups, it doesn't sacrifice any health. All four Simpsons family members are playable and each feels unique from the others, and multiplayer is really the only way to go with this one. That's the thing with Konami beat-em-ups, they're insanely fun in co-op but get kind of boring when playing solo. Anyway, you beat up a bunch of bad guys, play some pretty cool little mini games, and enjoy some awesome cutscenes. A fun game overall, but it can't be denied that the visuals, sound design, and use of the license are what really put this game over the top. It's so incredibly colorful and really captures the look of those early seasons of the show. Lots of recognizable characters and locations make appearances, and stages like the cemetery and the dream sequence are especially visually stunning. Add on top of that a soundtrack that mixes the music from the show with that very recognizable early 90s Konami sound, and even plenty of voice clips from the show's cast, and you've got an overall presentation that satisfied all of us young Simpsons fans in 1991, even if some of us weren't tall enough to reach the controls yet. This game is still an absolute classic.
Maggie!
Finally, to wrap things up, I wanted a game that was wacky, over the top, and quite simply an absolute blast to play. And I settled on the one and only Yaku Kakuto League Man, or as it's known outside of Japan, Ninja Baseball Batman. This is yet another game that I had never even heard of until some other YouTubers shined a light on it. Most notably the Angry Video Game Nerd when he featured it in one of his videos. With a premise like this, I pretty much had to play it. The story kicks off with a bunch of golden artifacts being stolen from the Baseball Hall of Fame. So it's up to a group of superheroes, the titular Ninja Baseball Batmen, to recover them. They go all across the United States to get the artifacts back, only to discover that when they're all combined, they can grant insane powers to whoever possesses them. This game is, in its premise and its gameplay, absolutely nuts. It supports up to 4 players and immediately throws a ton of insane characters at you to be pounded into oblivion. Giant evil baseball equipment, robots, anthropomorphic airplanes, and slot machines. If something can have arms and legs attached to it and made to attack you, you'll encounter it in this game. Each of the 4 playable characters has a unique fighting style and set of stats, and they each have quite a few attacks at their disposal. You've got your basic combination, dash attacks, air dash attacks, and super attacks, more so if your health goes into the red. Even though your characters are already wielding weapons, there are even more to pick up, such as additional baseball bats, ninja shurikens, and a devastating home plate that can be lobbed at enemies. There's even a power-up that summons a squad of cheerleaders to annihilate everything on screen with their insane levels of pep. The Predators have their shoulder cannons, the X-Men have their mutant powers, and the Punisher has a near limitless supply of guns and grenades. But the Ninja Baseball Batmen, they have cheerleaders of death. So who are you picking in a fight? Anyway, the gameplay here is the definition of the word frantic, but it's extremely fun, especially with some other players handy, and this is one that when you start playing it, you pretty much have to finish it. It's also not nearly as cheap and unforgiving as some other beat-em-ups, instead offering what feels like a more fair challenge without being too easy. And as with every game I've talked about today, the graphics and sound really make this a memorable game. Beat-em-ups typically aren't all that different from each other in terms of gameplay, so presentation counts for a lot. And with its vibrant colors, insane character designs, and upbeat soundtrack, this is one game that definitely stands out from the crowd. If you're a fan of the genre and still haven't given this game a try, stop what you're doing and play it immediately, because Ninja Baseball Batman is something very special. So there you go, everybody. Those are just a handful of awesome arcade beat-em-ups, but there are a lot more to play. So let me know down in the comments what's your all-time favorite beat-em-up, and if I do another video like this one, what games should I feature? I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, thanks for watching Mad Panic Gaming. Stay awesome, everybody. Goodbye.